What's up, Internet? I thought it'd be interesting to go through the 2025 State of the Game Industry report that the GDC just put out, I think today. Try to see what kind of nuggets we could find, see what kind of stuff we could talk about. So with that, I hope your evening's going good, and let's do a quick chat on what the GDC survey thinks about the gaming industry. For those of you that don't know, GDC Game Developers Conference, they do a survey of about 3,000 different respondents, where they do essentially a developer survey to kind of get a sense of what people are seeing in the industry. First thing, just to think a highlight, yeah, over 3,000 developers. So it's important to note for any type of like this, when you see surveys like this, obviously 3,000 developers is not make up the whole gaming industry, so there's always gonna be outliers. But I think you could definitely get a sense of some of the themes and pieces that people put in as they respond to this industry. So let's go ahead and see what kind of interesting stuff is in here. It's like a patch. I'm thinking like a patch note review, except the patch notes is gaming industry jobs. Isn't that fun? Gaming industry, what mail? Interesting. I think it'll be more and more interesting to see some of this stuff. 35% are white male, not part of the LGBTQ plus community. I think it's interesting to see. While the gaming industry remains largely white and male, a few key data points show how the developer community is becoming more and more diverse. That is cool. A lot of LGBT plus population represented as well. Interesting. The global game development community. If there's nothing else that the success of things like Marvel Rivals shows, is how some of these developers that are coming out of Tencent and NetEase, some of these games that are coming out of these publishers, are really taking the world by storm. Obviously, still biased on the United States. Yeah, Game Developers Conference in the United States. Yep, that checks out. You're going to see a lot of respondents coming out of the US, so that's one thing to think about if you are abroad. I know Ubisoft obviously has maybe one of the larger presences in Europe. %60% white or Caucasian. Interesting. This is why I think you still saw some of the backlash about things about like Dragon Age, Veilguard. Whenever I see people complaining just using the term woke, it always just makes me wonder what they actually mean by that statement. Because this data shows that developers, at least, you know, the 3,000 represented, are still overwhelmingly from white Caucasian backgrounds. Still got some work to do in terms of diversity there. This is what I love seeing a graph like this, because it's one of the things that I tell my students. When you're looking at these roles, I think it's really important to be realistic about what kinds of jobs are actually out there. When you look at this, right? So let's take a peek at this. The developer's role. Despite the surge in layoffs, the breakdown of job roles in the game industry is made consistent. Top roles are in game design, programming, and production and team management, like 2024. Majority of respondents, 59%, are either solo devs or work for studios that are the primary developers of their games. When it comes to job roles, newer developers are more likely to have careers in game design, while those more experienced tend to favor production and team management. Game narrative have seen the most year-on-year growth, going from 14% of developers in 2024 to 17% of them today. However, game narrative professionals reported being excessively impacted by layoffs in this last year. I feel real bad for those wanting to do narrative. I think I can personally attest to the amount of people that I've seen laid off from narrative positions. It's one of those tough things where I feel like a lot of people coming into the gaming industry want to have that like game narrative design experience, right? They want to like, hey, I want to be the writer. I want to write that character moment. I want to write that scene of Garrus and Shepard on top of the Citadel shooting bottles. Like that's such a cool moment. But the reality is, when you look at one of the things I tell students to do, look at credits for your favorite game and just list out how many jobs are in your specific area, right? How many writers does the game actually have? In a lot of even big AAA studios, it's going to be a pretty small number. It might even be under a dozen narrative jobs, if not just even like 3 or 4 or a handful. So I always tell my students, when you're looking at how to get into the gaming industry, just be realistic. If you're coming in for that narrative role, you know, it's not a huge percent there. Anything else we can take away from this? So this is percentage of the 3,000 surveyed, what job role they have. Yeah, game design again. This is the game design, programming, engineering. If you can have those technical skills, I think it's interesting that it calls out specifically those with more experience tend to favor production and team management. I think this is one of those things, especially in these types of roles. Once you start to kind of actually hone your craft, it's hard to be a leader if you don't know your craft, right? If you're not, don't have those programming skills backed up, if you haven't designed a game, if you aren't in the art space. Visual arts. Now that would be interesting to me. I wonder what they mean by visual arts. Is that just like any art creative field? Does that include technical art? Those would be kind of some of the questions I have based on there. I wonder will they get into this. 10% on audio, that's another, again, really cool field, but the numbers of audio tends to be pretty small. Audio jobs out there. Business and finance, nothing too surprising there. All right, let's see. Currently, 60% of game developers report having 10 years or less experience in the industry. That's up from 56% last year and 57% the year before that. Interesting. So 60% of game devs report having 10 years or less experience in the industry. I don't know if that's a good stat for people entering into the industry or if that means that people with experience are leaving and getting fired and laid off. A lot more solo devs, increasing from 18% to 21%. More developers working alone than there are developers at studios with 500 people. I think this is one cool thing. It's now, you know, obviously for every success story, like, what is it, Lethal Company or a Minecraft, you know, for every success story of a single person making a video game or things like that, there's a lot of failure stories. But I think it is more democratically available than ever for you to make your own game by yourself with a couple friends through game jams without working at one of the big devs. That's a very interesting stat there. Decrease in AAA studio representation going from 18% to 15%. And smaller companies. I'm really hopeful that once we kind of get past this, hopefully, you know, layoff city, we're going to see some more small companies. Small, nimble companies making those types of cool experiences. Very interesting there. All right, let's talk industry layoffs. Whew, do we have to? 1 in 10 game devs have been laid off in the past year. That's just a wild stat. Only 41. Another way to look at this. Of the respondents, right? You always have to couch it. Of the respondents is one of the big things you have to check. Of the respondents, only 43% said that there were no layoffs at their company. That means more than half of studios. That's crazy. Announcements on weekly, if not daily occurrence. I know I've seen a couple people who have been laid off twice in the last 12 months. If you're looking at 2024, that is not a fun feeling. Yeah, 41% of game devs impacted by layoffs. I'd be curious if that number is actually higher, especially considering the students and grads having trouble finding jobs. One of the tough things about the more students that graduate, the more people you want for those entry-level positions. Last year, there was a majority that said there had been no layoffs. Today, that number is down. Yeah, widespread issue that has yet to stabilize. That is perhaps the sad part, is that it's still going in. Did not take long for 2025 to keep getting layoffs here. Almost 60% of respondents expressed some level of concern about future layoffs. This is tough. Just what I was saying, right? When you look at those narrative positions, that's an easy thing to cut. I don't know if it's because studios think that they can replace those narrative designers easily or those writers easily, because there's so many small numbers of that position anyway. But that's one thing to prep for. Narrative, production, and team management. This one, I wonder if that's just because there's a larger percentage of producers that were affected. Team managers. Visual arts about 16%. Program engineering about 12%. Does tend to be the more stable side of things. From what I've seen, is the programming engineering side of game dev. And game design. Business and finance here as well. This, I think, would also be pretty low just because of the percentages numbers of people working in those roles as well. Why is this still happening? That's a great question. That would be a great question if we could figure that out. 20% said there was no reason given for their company's layoffs. Woof. That sucks. While many recognize the revenue market shifts were part of the problem, they place most of the blame on specific issues like COVID-era overexpansion, rising production costs, declining player interest, unrealistic expectations for the next big hit, and poor leadership and mismanagement. Top 3 reasons: restructuring, declining revenue, market shifts, industry trends. I mean, with the news of PlayStation canceling those live service games, I think at Bluepoint and Bend Studios, gotta wonder if that live service industry trend is a big part of that. Yeah, interesting. Greed and overhiring. Oof. Got some quotes here. Yeah. Oof. Over the past year, generative AI has shifted from a concept into a common tool. Investors are pumping billions of dollars into AI companies. Studios are busy developing their own proprietary tools. AI-generated content is a robust foothold in search engines, platforms, and advertisements. So let's see. 52% of devs work companies where Gen AI tools are being used. 1/3 of devs say they use them personally. As usage has gone up, curiosity has gone down. Less than a tenth say their companies are interested in Gen AI tools, down from 15% last year. In comparison, 27% say that companies have no interest in using them, a 9-point increase from 2024. When asked what applications they saw for use of Gen AI in the game industry, devs pointed to tasks like coding assistance, concept art and 3D model generation, automation of repetitive tasks. The word most frequently used in their response was none. No applications. Business and finance, that checks out. We're still not at the point where Gen AI can really make a game by itself, maybe more the business finance side. And now this is what I think is really interesting about Gen AI in the game industry, is that I do think there's things like coding assistance, concept art, 3D model generation, automation of repetitive tasks. I think rigging and animation, I think, is one of the most interesting areas that I'm curious to see how AI can help some of those pipelines. I think one of the things that you're going to see is you're going to see the devs that can use AI to make their pipelines faster. I think are going to be the ones that are really going to benefit from this. I still don't see a lot of stuff, and I think the survey shows it too. I still don't see a lot of cases where Gen AI is going to come in and totally revolutionize a discipline, at least as of now. But I do think there's places where it can. Automation of repetitive tasks, I think, is perhaps the best use case scenario that I see for Gen AI in the gaming industry. Very curious to see if that trend continues. Concept art, I think one of the big reasons that I think Gen AI could be helpful for concept art is iteration. I think one of the things I tell concept artists is that one of the big things you got to do when you're doing concept art is have multiple iterations of an idea. You got to be able to produce, hey, let's add the winter coat skin. Let's try to see this in a different perspective. Let's try to see it with different layers on. Let's try to see a cool character with this aspect or this design. And you have to have those multiple iterations. Concept art makes that really, or Gen AI could make that really fast, but I think you still got to get past all those unethical training sequences for that. So concept art is tough. I think rigging animation could be where those pipelines could be improved about some of those manual works that can make, again, things that make the pipeline easier. I think is where we're going to see that. Be interested. It's not surprising that the business and finance devs the one who use Gen AI the most. Business and finance, interesting. More companies have AI policies. Almost 2/3 of devs say they work at companies with some form of internal policy for generative AI use. Interesting. Well, optional use of Gen AI is along with companies that don't allow them to be used at all. Number of devs who say they're required to use Gen AI tools on the job doubled, so it's only at 4%. 4% is very small. Required to use Gen AI tools. That to me does not sound like Gen AI is coming to take all our jobs in the gaming industry. I think you're going to see the human factor, people wanting to know Gen AI policy in a lot of contracts, and you just protect yourself from so much stuff around copyright. And again, the biggest worry that I have with Gen AI in the gaming industry is if Gen AI is going to take some of these like entry-level type outputs, how are you going to be training early game designers, early coders, if there's no entry-level positions anymore because Gen AI makes that irrelevant. If you only have people that are in senior, mid to senior levels, where's that pipeline of talent going to be coming from? According to our survey, 13% of developers believe generative AI is having a positive impact, down from 21%. Interesting. So with the last year, it's down 8% positive impact on the gaming industry. Meanwhile, 30% of respondents said it has a negative impact, a 12-point increase. That's a pretty big delta if you're looking at that. It appears developer opinions on technology are hardening too. Number who said Gen AI is having a mixed impact decreased from 57 to 51. More developers are developing firmer and increasingly negative opinions on Gen AI. Over half of devs say they are very concerned, up from 42%. So the ethics, this is one of the things that I think helps for people that are concerned about this. Having over half of devs say that the ethics of Gen AI is concerning to them, I think is a very interesting touch point. Intellectual property theft, energy consumption. Yeah, the energy consumption stuff is nuts. Quality of AI generated content, potential biases, and regulatory issues. Job displacements. For job displacements, I think, from what I've seen, I still think the job displacement, people, I can't still find too many instances. If people know, feel free to at me. But I still can't see too many instances of full-on jobs being replaced by Gen AI. I think it is, again, that the survey shows developers who have been laid off in the past are no more likely to have concern about Gen AI than those who hadn't been. That's interesting to me because I think that's an easy boogeyman to point to of like Gen AI is going to take all our jobs. But I don't, that's obviously not being talked about, at least by the survey respondents here. 1,500 devs. It's a pretty large sample size. Faster their jobs, not lose them. I think that's one of the biggest things. Can you be faster your job? Can you fix those repetitive pipelines? Get on with the creative part, the human part of the work. Yeah, for the coding side, using source code they don't understand can have consequences. Yep. Responsible use is the key. Yeah. Definitely going forward, not a great replacement for real people, and quality is going to be damaged. I think the best case that I see is Gen AI fixing pipelines, being replacement for processes, not people. Passion for PC dev explodes. 80% of devs say they're currently making games for PC. 3/4 said the platform is of interest to them. The Steam Deck, man, could this be single-handedly the Steam Deck's input by being such a revolutionary device? Almost half wrote in the Steam Deck. I mean, that's a pretty crazy thing. When you see Xbox starting to drop rumors and people talking about an Xbox device, I mean, that's almost half of all devs surveyed by this wrote in the Steam Deck dev interests. That is a pretty fascinating stat. I know there's been a bit more hype for UGC platforms like Roblox, Minecraft, Unreal Engine. I think those UGC platforms, I think there was a lot of hype for devs and projects. I still think it's a great way for people to get their start if they're looking at designing content in that. But I kind of thought that might be a little bit higher. That's interesting. Tabletop games, 4%. Shout out Tabletop games. Game Pass being pretty full at 13% as well. This I wonder too if the difference between game devs and game designers, like what platforms are being used for current projects. Specifically, it's 13% for Game Pass. I wonder how much of that Game Pass discussion factors in at like the designing of the project, and how much of that is essentially a marketing decision. Once you have your product, get your marketers, your business people involved with Game Pass discussions. Also, now that we got the Switch 2, gotta imagine that the Switch 2 numbers would have bumped that up for sure. Ninja platform's cool. PlayStation continues its console lead over Xbox. Yeah, I know, duh. 38% making games for PS5. Cloud services. About 30% of devs are currently making games for Xbox Game Pass. Yeah, I mean, I think the deal between Xbox Game Pass and PlayStation Plus is still, I don't think, any comparison. I doubt Xbox is quite as happy as they are with some of that gap of Game Pass, though. Mobile devs increased. Brazil, South West Asia regions. Huh, highest percentage of devs who've been working on browser games. Huh, that's interesting. I wonder why browser games all of a sudden. 35% of all game devs working in VA are AR development. Interesting. That actually seems a little high to me. MetaQuest is the dominant space. Steam VR, PlayStation VR, VR2, followed by that. Okay, first time these questions are asked, this is VR and AR. Interesting. Until they figure out how to make people not get car sick at VR, I will not be adopting VR because I get hella car sick. Unity Unreal main on top. Unity announced it will be reversing its controversial runtime fee policy. Was that just September 2024? Wow, time flies when the world is crazy. I can't believe that was just September. That feels like just yesterday. Announcement came on the heels of year-long backlash against the proposed fee, one that drove some developers away from Unity. And Unity and Unreal tied at 32% each, largely unchanged. At this time, it appears that few developers have actually moved on from Unity. I get that. It's easy to say you're going to move away, but, you know, it's one other thing to have that be reality, especially when they did walk it back. I was curious if that would actually be a bit more of an effect. But this is why I tell people, students coming in, get whatever experience you can with Unity and with Unreal. These still are going to be the primary engines that people are using in the gaming industry, right? Godot, I think, coming in at 4%. It's a little low. I've seen Godot being, especially for students, kind of a larger entry point as well. But if you can, there's so many good Unity and Unreal tutorials out there. It's not that hard to just get started watching some of the curriculum on YouTube, finding devs that are actually working on projects here. I think Unity and Unreal is still what I advise for students. If you're interested, start looking whatever you can, tutorials about that, old GDC talks. Whatever you can to get experience in those two platforms is going to serve you really, really well in terms of the job market. Proprietary and in-house only at 13%. That is interesting. 13% proprietary and in-house. I mean, I think this is a huge piece of what I'm curious to see about with Halo Studios, with moving to Unreal Engine and the teasers that they put out about the quality that Unreal Engine can give them. Very curious to see if more devs are going to do that. You got CD Projekt Red moving to Unreal for Witcher 4. Very curious to see if this number is going to be even lower next year. I'm really going to see that numbers go up higher, or if we're going to see people using some of these other niche products here. Apprenticeships would be cool. I like that answer a lot. There's already so few companies that even do internship programs that I think something like an apprenticeship, which I think what they mean by this is something that's like basically post-school internships, so a way to still kind of get practical experience, get your feet wet, have it be for entry level, but you don't have to be in that schooling program. I think that could be a really cool thing just to really get that early career talent in there. Widespread unionizing. Oof. No free games. Wow, that would be a massive change. Can you imagine going on the mobile store, looking at games without those free games? Co-ops and employee-owned studios, that would be an interesting thing too. Developers are divided on live service games. Interesting. Live service games have become part of the industry's ecosystem with games like Fortnite, Warframe, Genshin Impact. For every Valorant, there's a Concord, an Anthem, or a Redfall. Oof. Can we get F to pay respects? Can add in the canceled PlayStation projects now as well. Saw rumors today that the Horizon MMO might be axed too. We asked our survey respondents whether they'd be interested in developing a live service game as their next title. About 13% said they would. 42% said they were not interested. 29% said it didn't know. Only 13% of survey respondents said they'd be interested in developing a live service game as this next title. I think that's a very fascinating percentage there, right? If they're not already working on it, the amount of people that are now either are saying no or I don't know to live service games of devs currently in industry, that's got to be all connected. And I think this will be a very interesting space to see the blowback on the timing of this survey, right? When was the survey? When were people thinking about these questions? Huge number. Many respondents saw the value in live service, not only on the financial side, but also on the player experience and community building. But concerns about declining player interest, creative stagnation, predatory practices, microtransactions, risk of burnout, market oversaturation, how many developers noting how tough it is to break through and build a sustainable player base. I mean, you saw that in that crazy stat about how many games are people are playing that are older games that are not games released recently, right? Top measures of live service success: the stable concurrent user base, CCU base, percentage of daily active user, percentage of monetized players. I think, and that's when you start putting in, right, this is a live service success. This means like the studio success, right? Like if you're a game studio and you have a big live service gambit, right, percentage of monetized players being such a big part of your live service success has nothing to do with the quality of your game design. It's percentage of monetized players. Then you get into marketing decisions, you get into industry ups and downs, you get into the economic realities of a live service game. It's a lot of risk. I think that 13% number would have been a lot different in the past couple of years. Well, after we saw this Concord, Anthem, or Redfall, I think that number is gonna be very telling. Steady growth, quick feedback for iterative design loops, engaging, compelling gameplay and story, wrap around the experience. Man, I feel that as a long-term Destiny 2 player, I think the stuff where you have wrap around experience, right? Engaging, compelling gameplay and story for the player. One of the things I have, I think is a benefit for live service games is that you're constantly doing iterative design loops, a quick feedback, and you're always pushing something, right? You're always got the next season, whether it's pushing a feature to the next season because it's not quite ready yet, needs more time to cook, or saying, hey, we got to go now, we're going to push this feature in, figure it out live, so to speak. I think there is both like a freedom that can be had for that as well as pressure. Games shouldn't only exist as long as some old suits decide they're profitable. That's tough. That is tough. Hollywood adapting more video games. Yay! I think, maybe? Interest in trying to become the next multimedia hit could be going down. Interesting. Yeah, you also see about 65% of them saying no or I don't know for adaptive video games. So I'm not going to hold my breath for this one. I was pleasantly surprised by the Fallout show. That was my favorite viewing experience of 2024, I think. I was a huge Fallout fan, but I'm going to be holding my breath. Premium games. 57% of respondents said they're currently working on premium games. Least used were premium tier subscriptions and paid subscriptions. Yep. Word of mouth. Most used marketing tool overall for game devs. Social media tracking close behind. Real-time comms like Discord or Slack. Live streamers or events. Game crossovers and promotions. Only 28% of developers said they made use of this method. Man, this is one thing I don't love about the in-game crossovers and promotions is just the IP dilution that you get. Everything starts to look at like Ready Player One. All kind of look to be like the same game. Interesting to see that be the least popular crossover and promotion. When I say word of mouth, it's curious to me that they split out things like Discord and social media word of mouth. Are they literally saying like, yo, Luke, you should try this game? Like word of mouth, word of mouth? They must be if they split those out. Half of devs are funding their own games. Woof. Rough year for funding. Venture capital, 15%. Seed funding, crowdfunding, pretty low. Don't know. 26% too real. This is one thing that I'd love to see more transparency on because I think from my perspective, working more with students on the getting into gaming industry side, I'd love to see more practical tips for funding especially for they showed earlier how more and more devs are going the indie route and smaller studios. I think it's going to be more important to have places where you can really go to figure out the business of games. I know there's some cool things in Washington. I think Tim Cullings is doing to do some stuff around these areas, but I think this is a cool area that would I'd love to see more on and more transparency on from people that have made it work. The funding side. I know it's not always the fun part, but right, it gets your game made. Self-funding appears to be working. 89% reporting being somewhat successful. Code of contracts, not all successful. Venture capital and crowdfunding. Most cited issues were time. That's the thing, right? Once you get the game, once you get a game that's actually fun, you get through the game design piece, you get through maybe vertical slice, you still got to make it through all these other barriers. Market instability, people thinking you don't have enough industry experience. If anything, this is just more and more amazing how games actually do get made and released. Yeah, developer channels, a lot more studios out there seeking funding, a lot more competitive and less money to go around. That's going to be huge, and I think this story is going to carry on a lot in 2025 as well. Yep, chicken and egg, prototype to get funding, need funding to create a prototype. I've been reading Jason Schreier's book about the layoffs in the gaming industry. What is it? Press Reset, I think, is the one. Is that the Blizzard one? And I think one of the bigger things that I think is going to be a reality too is like having that cycle. I think you see some devs that essentially use, if they get that hit, they put money away. They say, hey, like this is going to be the hit that lasts me to the next game. That kind of chicken and egg thinking is going to be big, but you still got to get your first one hit. Yep. Work has stopped as we all need to support ourselves with any job. Hey, you got to support yourself. You got to take care of yourself. It's one thing we've learned. Got to look out for you because no one else is going to. Yep. It's tough reality of games nowadays. All right, let's check out advocacy. Companies are seeing some success with the game accessibility, DEI, and sustainability measures. 71% of developers think their company's DEI and accessibility efforts have been at least slightly successful. 51% feel the same way about sustainability efforts. This is an interesting stat, right? You see so many gamers complaining about, characters that don't look like them. But 71% of devs think their company's DEI and accessibility efforts have been at least slightly successful. Very different from the dev side versus the angry internet mob side. Accessibility is huge too, right? I think accessibility is something that I think more and more people are talking about. And look at that breakdown of accessibility measures, right? So these are just like simple things, colorblind settings. I think things like the adaptive controllers you're seeing out there, text size, things like that. How adjustable is your game? Think about difficulty accessibility as well, like how accessible is your game to literally play. It's actually pretty high numbers when you look at very comfortable through slightly comfortable there. It's very interesting. Gosh, climate disasters. Yep. This is why, again, hey, come back to the office. Hopefully the climate disasters don't affect it. And this is all, I'm assuming, before the LA fires as well. I think that number would be a lot higher. Some of those SoCal studios too. Developers will report working more hours for the first time in years. Oof, you hate to see that. Continue to work 40 hours. Percentage has decreased 64 to 57%. I wonder if this is too when you are in a situation where your coworkers are getting laid off. You're trying to prove yourself, right? You're trying to be like, hey, I'm one of the ones that deserves to stay. I wonder if that number has gone down because of that. Also, when your team gets laid off, guess who gets to pick up the slack? The survivors, those who are still there. Yep, it's gonna be you. Self-pressured, 2/3 of it's contributed to self-pressure. Interesting. Union support stays consistent. Union support among devs is relatively unchanged from 2024. 58% of respondents saying game industry workers should unionize. 10% saying they shouldn't. 1/5 of devs said they've talked about unionizing at their companies in the past 12 months. Interesting. Supportive mix posing. This is one of the big fears, right? Unions could harm indie studios, stifle creativity, force companies to either close and move their jobs overseas. Very mixed bag. Better do it before AI takes all of our jobs. Oof. That comment is rough. So I think it's gonna be interesting. All right, well, not too many big takeaways. Otherwise, then that was a rough year last year. It's always interesting to see things like this. Get a survey of large devs and see what large subset of survey, right? See what devs are saying about the games. If I can extrapolate this to people that are trying to get into the industry, again, Unity or Unreal, it's gonna be the biggest engines to get to be a part of. Get comfortable working with some set of Gen AI, especially if there's ways to make your pipelines faster. But I don't think, at least as of now, still not taking people's jobs full sail. And then start thinking about those roles too. You know, again, with those industry layoffs, developers roles, game design, programming, engineering, production team management, visual arts, still tend to be the most numbers wise when of jobs available in the industry. Well, there you have it, folks. Game industry, GDC 2025. Guess we'll see what happens the rest of the year. Well, great chatting. I'm gonna split this up, put this on YouTube probably. And yeah, see you later, Twitchverse. Luke out.